The training hall on Kesrin Station smelled of ozone and old fear. It was the largest enclosed space on the orbital academy, a dome of gray resin ribbed with support struts that glowed a dull amber whenever the artificial gravity cycled. Cadets from 41 worlds trained here, and every one of them on their first day had felt the same thing that Mira Voss felt now. The room was watching. Not the instructors, though they watched too. The room. The scuffed floor knew who had bled on it. The high circular gallery, where senior cadets lounged with their long limbs draped over the railings, knew who had begged. And every newcomer walked into that awareness the way a small animal walks into an open field, sensing the shadow of something large above it before ever looking up. Mira was 17 standard years old. On Earth that had meant she was still a child by some measures and something more by others. Out here, at the Concord's Interspecies Combat and Command Academy, it meant she was the smallest sentient in a hall full of predators, and she knew it, and she had decided a long time ago to stop caring about it. She stood at the edge of the sparring circle in a plain gray undersuit 2 sizes too large, because the quartermaster had never in the Academy's 400-year history needed to stock a human's dimensions. Her dark hair was pulled back tight. Her hands hung loose at her sides. She was not tall. She was not broad. To the eyes of every other creature in that dome, she looked like a mistake, a clerical error the Concord had made when it opened a slot for the newest member species and let a girl fill it. Across the circle stood Threshan. He was Threshan, and among the Threshan he was considered exceptional, which is to say he was considered dangerous even by a people who prized danger the way humans prized kindness. He stood a full head and shoulders above the tallest human who had ever lived, a wall of banded muscle sheathed in hide the color of wet slate. 2 curving tusks rose from his lower jaw, filed to points, polished so they caught the amber light. His eyes were small and black and set deep beneath a heavy ridge of bone, and they had a way of not blinking that made new cadets check, later, whether they had imagined it. For 3 cycles he had ruled this hall, not officially. The Academy did not appoint champions, but rule is a thing that happens whether or not anyone signs off on it, and Threshan had made himself the unofficial law of the training dome through a simple and relentless method. He broke people. He broke them in sanctioned bouts, and he broke them in the sanctioned adjacent bouts that instructors pretended not to see, and once or twice he had broken them in ways that were not sanctioned at all, in the equipment corridors where the sensors ran thin. Nobody reported it. Reporting Threshan was understood, across all 41 worlds represented on Kesrin Station, to be a mathematical error with a very short life expectancy. He was looking at Mira now with an expression she had already learned to read across species lines. It was the look of a creature that has found something small and is deciding, without urgency, whether to be bored or entertained by it. "You," Threshan said. His voice came out of a chest the size of a shipping crate, and it filled the dome without effort. The Concord translator embedded behind Mira's ear rendered it flawlessly, but it kept the rumble, the low grinding undertone that the software could have smoothed away and chose not to, because the software knew, the way the room knew, that the rumble was the point. Human. "Come here." The hall had gone quiet. That was the tell. On any ordinary morning the training dome roared the clash of practice staves, the wet impact of grappling bodies, the barked corrections of instructors in 6 languages. Now all of it had stilled, the way a forest stills, and 41 worlds worth of cadets had turned to watch the smallest of them be summoned. Mira did not come here. She stayed where she was at the edge of the circle, and she looked up at him. She had to look up. There was no help for that, and she said nothing. It was not defiance, exactly. Defiance would have implied she thought a response was owed. Her silence was more like the silence of a stone that has been asked to move and does not consider the request its business. Something flickered behind the deep black eyes, annoyance, then worse interest. I said, Corvith rumbled, taking one step forward, and the floor plate registered his weight with a soft complaint. Come here. When a Threshan speaks to prey, the prey answers. Where I come from, this is the first lesson. It is the only lesson small things ever need. I heard you, Mira said. Her voice was quiet. It did not carry the way his did. But the dome was so silent now that it carried anyway, and there was something in the flatness of it, the total absence of the tremor everyone expected, that made a Quills cadet in the gallery lean forward on her perch and rasp her spines together in the gesture her people used for surprise. You heard me, Corvith repeated. He said it slowly, tasting it, the way a large animal tastes a thing it intends to enjoy. And yet you do not obey. Interesting. Do you know what I am, human? Do they teach you on your little wet rock what a Threshan war-caste is? No, Mira said. We hadn't met any of you yet. You're new to us. We're new to you. She paused. That's usually where people start over, not where they end. A ripple went through the gallery. Not laughter. The aliens did not laugh the way humans did, but the atmospheric equivalent, a shifting and rustling of many bodies registering that the small thing had said something with an edge on it. Corvith's tusks caught the light as his mouth moved. You have a tongue, he said. Good. It will make the noise more entertaining when I take it from you. And there it was, the thing the room had been waiting for since Mira Voss first walked through the iris door 11 days ago. The challenge. Everyone in the dome understood it, across every barrier of language and biology, because a challenge in a training hall is one of the oldest and most universal grammars in the galaxy. It does not need translation. It arrives in the body before it arrives in the ear. Mira understood it too. She looked at the enormous creature filling the far side of the circle, and something moved behind her eyes that none of the watching cadets could name, because none of them had ever seen it before, because it belonged to a species they had known for less than 3 years and did not yet remotely understand. It was not fear. It was not bravado. It was a kind of quiet, terrible arithmetic. She was doing math. She was looking at 700 pounds of war-caste Threshan, and she was doing math, and the math was not about whether she could win. The math was about how long it would take. To understand what happened in the next 90 seconds, you have to understand how Mira Voss came to be standing in that circle at all, because nothing about it was an accident, and nothing about her was the mistake the room assumed. Humanity had been part of the Concord for 2 years, 7 months, and a scattering of days. In galactic terms, this was nothing, less than nothing, a rounding error against species who measured their membership in millennia. The Concord was a compact of civilizations bound loosely together for trade, defense, and the maintenance of a fragile peace along the rimward frontier, and it had accepted humanity the way a very old and very tired club accepts a loud new member, with paperwork, with reservations, and with the quiet expectation that the newcomer would soon learn its place near the bottom of the table. The Academy on Threshan Station was where the Concord shaped its future officers. Every member species sent its most promising young into that orbital dome to be trained together, so that when they graduated and scattered to the fleets and the frontier posts, they would trust the shape of one another, would have bled beside one another, would think of the person from 3 worlds over not as an alien, but as the cadet who once dragged them out of a collapsed pressure tunnel during a drill. It was, in theory, the Concord's finest institution. In practice, it was also its cruelest, because you cannot forge trust between predators without letting them test one another, and testing, among predators, has a way of drawing blood. Humanity's first 3 nominees had washed out. This was the thing nobody at the Academy said aloud, but everybody knew. The first human cadet had lasted 40 days before requesting transfer. The second had lasted 200 and was medically discharged after a training incident the Concord's own review board had, with visible discomfort, ruled consistent with Academy norms. The third had simply stopped attending, and one gray morning her bunk was empty and her name was scrubbed from the roster, and the aliens who noticed noted it the way you note weather. Humans, the consensus went, were not built for this. They were clever, adaptable, oddly resilient in some narrow ways, but small, soft, short-lived, and above all fragile, and the Academy did not make allowances for fragile. Mira was the fourth. She had not been the obvious choice. Back on Earth, in the sprawling selection program that fed candidates up the long ladder to Threshan, there had been dozens of humans who looked better on paper, bigger, older, more decorated, men and women who had already served in Earth's own militaries and carried the scars to prove it. The selection board had argued about her for a long time. She was too young. She was too small even by human standards. Her file was strange, full of gaps, and the one thing everyone kept circling back to was that she did not seem to want it the way the others did. The others hungered for the slot, for the prestige, for the chance to be the human who finally made it stick. Mira just watched them hunger and said, when they finally asked her directly why she should go, "Because I'll still be standing when they stop." They had not understood what she meant, neither yet did Corvus drawl. Mira had grown up in a place that did not appear on most of the tourist maps of Earth, a high, cold valley where the air was thin and the winters were long and the people made their living the old way, on their feet and with their hands. Her mother taught. Her father had been a climber and a guide until the mountain that made his living finally took it, when Mira was 9. After that it was just the two of them, and the valley, and the discipline of a place that did not forgive carelessness and did not care whether you were tired. She had started training when she was 6. Not because anyone pushed her. Her mother had gently, repeatedly, tried to steer her toward gentler things. But because in that valley there was an old woman named Tenzin Serral who ran a low room above the market where children learned to move. Serral was ancient. Nobody knew how old. She had come from somewhere else decades before Mira was born, and she taught a thing that did not have a clean name in any of the languages spoken in the valley, a discipline stitched together out of a dozen older ones, some of them nearly forgotten. She did not teach it as a sport. There were no tournaments, no belts, no crowds. There was only the low room, the cold floor, and Serral's endless, patient, merciless correction. "You are not learning to fight," Serral told the children on the first day, every year the same words. "Fighting is easy. Any fool can throw himself at another fool. You are learning to end things. There is a difference, and if you never understand the difference, you should leave now and take up farming, which is honest work." Most of the children left. The ones who stayed learned slowly over years what she meant. Serral's discipline had one governing idea, and she returned to it in 100 forms. The idea was this: a real confrontation is not a performance. It is not the long, swaying, theatrical exchange of blows that people imagine, the trading of damage until one combatant is worn down. A real confrontation is a door that opens for a fraction of a second and then closes. Everything before the door is posture. Everything after is aftermath. The entire art, the only art that mattered, was learning to see the door, and to be already moving through it before your opponent knew it had opened. "They will be bigger than you," Serral said, and she said it to Mira specifically more than once in the years when it became clear that Mira was going to stay small. "Almost everyone will be bigger than you. This is not a problem. This is information. A large thing has more mass to move, more surface to defend, more distance for its signals to travel from its brain to its hands. Every advantage they have is also a cost they must pay. Learn the cost. Charge them for it." She made Mira spar against the biggest students in the room, then against 2 at once, then against the grown men who came in the evenings, some of them soldiers, some of them just large and angry. Mira lost and lost and lost, and Serral watched her lose with the serene attention of someone watching a seed refuse to sprout, knowing perfectly well that it would. Then one evening, when Mira was 14, a soldier on leave, a big man, a good man, not cruel, just certain of himself in the way big men often are, came to the low room and asked to spar with the students as a courtesy, a demonstration. He went through 3 of the older boys in a manner that was kind but total, setting them down gently on the mat one after another. And then Cyril, without a word, gestured Mira forward. The soldier smiled. He was careful with her. He came in slow, telegraphing, meaning to let her feel like she was doing something before he ended it. The door opened. Nobody in the room afterward could quite agree on what they had seen. The soldier reached. There was a shift of weight that seemed to happen in the space between 2 heartbeats, and then the soldier was on the floor, breath driven out of him, one arm folded up behind him at the exact angle past which it would break, and Mira was crouched over him with her whole small weight arranged along the single line where his strength could not reach. She had not hit him. That was the thing people remembered. She had barely seemed to touch him. She had simply arrived all at once, at the one place his enormous strength was useless, and closed the door. The soldier lay very still, because he understood, as a professional, exactly how thoroughly he had been ended, and how quickly and by whom. Cyril said nothing. She only nodded, once, the way she nodded perhaps twice a decade, and that nod meant more to Mira than any tournament trophy could have. 3 years later, when the human selection program came sniffing through the valleys looking for candidates hard enough to survive the alien academy, Cyril wrote a single line on Mira's recommendation, and the selection board argued for a month about what it meant. The line read, "She is finished. Send her before someone breaks her by trying to teach her more." 11 days at the academy had taught Mira a great deal. She had learned the geography of the station, its long spinal corridors and its cramped cadet berths, and the mess hall where 41 species ate 41 different things, and pretended not to be nauseated by one another's meals. She had learned the daily rhythm, the drills, the punishing rotation of physical conditioning that the Concord's exobiologists had calibrated, generations ago, to a brutal middle standard that no single species found comfortable, and none found impossible. She had learned who to sit near and who to avoid, which instructors were fair, and which had already, in 11 days, made clear that they considered her presence an insult to the institution. She had learned that she was, by every physical metric the academy measured, at the very bottom. She could not lift what the others lifted. She could not strike as hard, could not endure the same environmental extremes, could not go as long without rest. In the endless conditioning drills she finished last, or near last, her small body burning through reserves the larger cadets barely touched. The instructors logged her numbers and the numbers were bad, and more than one of them had already written her off, another soft human who would wash out like the 3 before her, and good riddance. What the numbers did not measure, what no instrument on Threshan station was designed to measure, because no previous species had ever required it, was the thing Cyril had spent 11 years building in the low, cold room above the market. Mira had spent those 11 days watching. Not training, watching. In every drill, every sparring rotation, every casual dominance display in the mess hall and the corridors, she had watched the way these creatures moved. She had studied the Threshan and their banded muscle and their reliance on overwhelming forward mass. She had studied the quills and their reactive spines, the Vandre with their 4 arms and their maddening reach, the Solon who were fast and light and fought like the wind but tired. She noticed. They tired if you made them commit. She had built in 11 days a private atlas of every species in the dome, not of their strengths, which everyone catalogued and feared, but of their costs, what each advantage forced them to pay, where each of them had to leave a door open in order to be as terrifying as they were. She had studied Corvith most of all, because it had been obvious from the first hour that Corvith was the room's shadow, and that sooner or later the shadow would fall on her. She knew, for instance, that his charge was devastating and that he loved it too much. She knew that he led with the left tusk, always, a habit so ingrained he no longer knew he had it. She knew that his enormous strength lived in a body that had never in 3 cycles had to fight anything it could not simply overpower, which meant it had never learned to recover from a mistake, because it had never made one that cost it. She knew that when he was certain of victory, and he was always certain of victory, he dropped his weight forward onto his front foot a half-second before he committed, a tell that on a Threshan was invisible to Threshan eyes but screamed at hers, because Serral had trained her on human soldiers who did the exact same thing, transferring weight before the strike, opening the door. She knew all of this 11 days in, standing at the edge of the circle, while 700 pounds of certainty told her it was going to take her tongue. And she knew one more thing, the thing that mattered most, the thing Serral had drilled into her until it lived below thought, that she must not do any of it slowly. There would be no swaying exchange, no test of endurance she could not win, no trading of damage against a creature that could break her in half with a distracted swing. If she let it become a fight, she would lose, and losing would mean the medical bay or worse. So it could not become a fight. It had to be a door opened, entered, and closed, before the room, before the instructors, before Corvith Dral himself understood that anything had begun. That was the arithmetic behind her flat, quiet eyes, not whether, how long. The answer she arrived at was, less than 2 seconds, once he committed, and she was already deciding how to make him commit. Dral. The word came from across the dome, sharp and dry, and the atmosphere in the hall changed the way it changes when a parent enters a room full of children who have been doing something they shouldn't. Instructor Vesaloon crossed the floor with the unhurried authority of a creature who had never in her long career needed to hurry. She was Salon, tall and narrow and gray-gold, her limbs elongated and precise, her large luminous eyes set wide in a face that gave away nothing. She was the senior combat instructor on Threshan Station, and she had held that post for longer than most of the cadets had been alive. She had trained officers who now commanded fleets. She had, it was said, once fought a Threshan war-caste to a standstill in her youth, though she never spoke of it, and the fact that the story survived at all told you something about how rare such a thing was. She stopped at the edge of the circle, between Mira and Corvith, but slightly apart from both, and she looked at the enormous Threshan with an expression of profound weariness. "You know the rule," she said. "Sanctioned bouts are logged and supervised. What you are doing is not a sanctioned bout. It is a hallway execution with an audience, and I have told you before, I will not have it in my dome." "It is a challenge, Instructor," Corvith rumbled. He did not look at her. He kept his small black eyes on Mira, the way a predator does not take its gaze off prey merely because a larger predator has entered the clearing. "The human insulted me. She refused a Threshan summons. Among my people this is answered in blood. You have taught us, have you not, that the Academy honors the ways of all its species." It was a clever thing to say, and everyone in the dome knew it. The Academy did honor the ways of its species. It had to. It was the entire premise of the place, the great fragile experiment in binding predators together by respecting rather than erasing what made each of them dangerous. A loon could not simply forbid a Threshan challenge without appearing to rank human comfort above Threshan custom, and the political delicacy of that, with humanity so new and so watched, was not lost on anyone. A loon's luminous eyes shifted to Mira. "Cadet Voss," she said, "you are within your rights to decline. There is no dishonor in it. You have been here 11 days. He has been here 3 cycles. This is not a contest. It is not meant to be won. If you decline, I will log it and no fault will attach to you, and you will train tomorrow as though this morning did not happen." She meant it kindly. Mira understood that. In her own austere, solemn way, Instructor Aloon was extending the girl a rope, was trying to spare her what everyone in the dome believed was coming. The sight of the small human broken across the floor, the 4th failure, the confirmation of everything the Academy already believed about the soft new species from the wet blue rock. And Mira understood, too, the trap folded inside the kindness. If she declined, she would live and she would train tomorrow, and every creature in the dome would know that the human had been offered a fight and had run from it. It would follow her. It would attach to her name and worse, to the word human, and the next human cadet, and the one after would inherit it. Humanity's place at the bottom of the very old and very tired club's table would be confirmed not by their weakness but by their fear. And that was a thing Mira Voss had come a very long way, across a great deal of cold, empty space, specifically not to allow. "Thank you, Instructor," Mira said. "I understand my rights." "Then you decline," Alun said, and there was something in her voice that might, in a warmer species, have been relief. "No," Mira said, "I accept." The dome exhaled. Alun went very still. It was not the stillness of surprise, precisely. She was too old and had seen too much to be surprised by a child's pride. It was closer to the stillness of grief, the resignation of a healer who has just heard a patient refuse the only treatment. She looked at the small human in the oversized undersuit, and something moved briefly behind the luminous eyes, and then it was gone, buried under 40 years of professional discipline. "Understand what you are accepting, cadet," she said quietly, so quietly that only the front rank could hear. "He will not stop when you fall. He has never learned to. That is why I try to prevent these things. I cannot save you once it begins. My hands will be too slow. Do you understand? By the time I reach you, whatever is going to happen will already be finished." "Yes, Instructor," Mira said. "I'm counting on it." Alun did not know what to make of that. She would spend a long time, afterward, thinking about it, turning the phrase over in the quiet of her quarters, examining it from every angle, and it would be years before she fully understood that the girl had not been speaking of herself. The instructor stepped back to the edge of the circle. She raised one long gray-gold hand, and the dome fell into the deepest silence it had held all morning. In the gallery, cadets from 41 worlds leaned forward as one, the quills rasping their spines, the Vandre folding their 4 arms in the posture their people used for witnessing, the Solon going flat and wind still. Word had traveled the way word travels in a closed community, faster than sound, faster than sense. And somehow, in the 11 minutes since Corvith Drawl had first said the word human, half the academy had found a reason to be in or near the training dome. They had come to watch the small thing die a little. That was the honest truth of it, and Mira knew it, and she did not resent them for it. They had never seen a human do anything but wash out. She was about to give them something new to see. "Sanctioned," Alun said, and the word made it official, made it legal, put it in the log. "First submission or first incapacitation. No strikes to the ocular cluster. No use of implanted systems." Her eyes swept both combatants and lingered, a half-second too long, on Mira. "Begin when you are ready. May you both leave this circle with honor." She lowered her hand. And she did not step away, not fully, because some old instinct in her, older than her rank, older than her caution, kept her body angled toward the center of the circle, one foot slightly forward, ready to move. She had said her hands would be too slow. She believed it. But 40 years of watching children hurt one another had left her unable to simply stand and let it happen. And so she poised herself at the edge, useless and ready. And that half-second of readiness would turn out to be the most important detail of the entire morning, because it meant that Instructor Vess Alun, alone among every witness in the dome, would very nearly, see the door open. Almost, not quite. Nobody was fast enough for that. Corvith Drawl did not wait long. He was not a patient creature by nature, and patience was in any case beneath him here. This was not a fight in his understanding. It was a formality, a brief unpleasant chore, the disciplining of a small insolent animal that had forgotten its place. He had done it 100 times. He would do it now, and quickly, because the human's insolence had annoyed him, and he wanted to feel the annoyance dissolve into the familiar clean satisfaction of a body giving way beneath his hands. He rolled his massive shoulders, and the banded muscle shifted under the slate-gray hide with a sound like slow leather. He lowered his head, angling the left tusk forward, always the left, though he did not know he did it, and he fixed his small black eyes on the human center of mass, and he began to move. Not a charge, not yet. He came forward slowly at first, deliberately, savoring it, herding her toward the far edge of the circle where she would have nowhere to retreat, where he could pin her against the boundary and take his time. It was a good tactic. It had worked 100 times. It relied on the prey doing what prey does, giving ground, backing away, letting the larger creature dictate the distance and the tempo and the terms. Mira did not give ground. This was the first thing that went wrong for Corvith Drawl, though he was slow to recognize it as wrong. Prey backed away. That was the rule. That was the first lesson, the only lesson small things ever needed. But the human did not back away. She did something stranger, something that violated the deep grammar of predator and prey so completely that his instincts had no answer for it. She came forward too. Not fast, not aggressively. She simply closed the distance he was trying to control, walking into his advance with her hands still loose at her sides, and her flat dark eyes fixed on a point that was not his eyes, not his tusks, not his hands, but somewhere lower, somewhere around his hips and his front foot, a place no opponent had ever looked before because no opponent had ever gotten close enough to matter. She walked into the reach of a creature 4 times her weight as though she were walking into a room, and the wrongness of it, the sheer category error of it, made Corvith Drawl do the one thing that would cost him everything. It made him hesitate. Only for an instant, a quarter of a heartbeat, but in that instant his certainty developed a hairline crack, and to steady himself, to reassert the natural order, to remind the small thing and himself of what was about to happen, he did the thing his body always did when it was about to commit. He dropped his weight forward onto his front foot, gathering the mass of himself into the charge that had ended 100 fights. The door opened. What happened next took less time than it will take to describe, and that disparity is the whole point, and it is the reason that everyone who witnessed it would spend the rest of their careers arguing about what they had actually seen. Later, the accounts would not agree. This is what witnesses always say about the things that matter most, and it is not a failure of memory but a truth about speed. Some events happen faster than perception can lay them down in order, and the mind, refusing to admit that it missed something, invents a smooth story to cover the gap. 41 worlds worth of cadets watched Mira Voss meet Corvith Drawl, and 41 worlds worth of cadets came away with 41 slightly different, all slightly wrong, accounts of a thing that had taken less than 2 seconds. Here is what actually happened. When Corvith dropped his weight forward, he committed his entire mass to a line, a single vector, aimed at the space where a retreating opponent would be. It was an enormous investment of force, and like all enormous investments it could not be recalled once made. 700 pounds of war-caste Threshan does not stop and does not turn, not in the fraction of a second available, not once the weight has gone forward onto the front foot. This was the cost of his strength. This was the Dorsal had spent 11 years teaching Mira to see. The bigger the creature, the more total the commitment, the wider the door, and Corvith Drawl was the biggest thing in the dome. Mira was already gone from the line. She did not leap back. That was what his instincts expected, what the whole tactic was built to punish, and it was precisely wrong. Retreating from a Threshan charge only fed it, gave it the ground it wanted, let it build. Instead she moved forward and to the outside of his committed front foot, along the one narrow arc where his mass was carrying him one way and could not be carrying him another. She moved on a diagonal so tight it looked, to the watching cadets, like she had simply blinked out of the path and reappeared beside him, and in that reappearing she was no longer prey and no longer in front of him. She was past his tusks. She was inside his reach. She was in the one place 700 pounds of forward-committed Threshan could not defend, because to defend it he would have had to already be turning, and he had already, an eternal quarter-second ago, chosen not to. His strength was still there, all of it. Not 1 gram of it had gone anywhere. None of it could reach her. This is the thing that Cyril understood and had built her entire discipline around, the thing that the Academy's instruments could not measure and its instructors did not know. Strength is only strength when it can be applied. A creature 4 times your weight has 4 times your force and also 4 times your commitment, and the two things do not cancel, they multiply the size of the door. Mira had not defeated Corvith's strength. She had done something the room could not conceive of. She had arranged herself, with her whole small mass, along the single line where his strength did not point, and then she had turned his commitment into her weapon. She took his front leg. Not with force, she did not have the force and did not need it. As his weight came down onto the front foot, she was already there, low, her shoulder driving into the back of the knee joint at the exact angle the joint was not built to resist, her arms wrapping the ankle, her entire small body weight and momentum aligned into the one narrow line where a 2-inch shift could unmake 700 pounds of certainty. She did not try to lift him. That would have been suicide. She simply took the leg out from under the mass that was already, catastrophically, committed to going forward, and let the mass do to itself what she could never have done to it. Corvith Draal fell like a building. There is no other way to describe it. A creature that size does not stumble, does not sway, does not have the delicate human vocabulary of near recoveries. When his front leg came out from under him, all 700 pounds of forward commitment continued forward and downward with the full ruin of its own momentum, and the floor plates of the training dome registered the impact with a boom that the cadets in the gallery felt in their chests. His tusks scored 2 long grooves in the resin floor. His arms, so strong, so useless, splayed out to catch a fall that was happening far too fast to catch. And Mira was already at the next place. This was the part that nobody afterward could reconstruct, because this was the part that happened in the gap perception could not cross. She did not celebrate the takedown. She did not pause to see it land. In Cyril's discipline, the takedown was never the end. It was the middle, the hinge, the moment the door was fully open and about to close. As Corvith crashed down, Mira was already flowing up his falling body along the line of least resistance, her small weight arriving at his back, her arms threading beneath the great slab of his jaw and around the thick column of his throat, her legs hooking his splayed arms wide and pinning them to the floor with the leverage of geometry rather than muscle. She did not squeeze with strength she did not have. She locked the geometry, the way Cyril had taught her, so that the more he struggled, the more completely he trapped himself, so that his own enormous strength, applied now in panic, became the mechanism of his own restraint. By the time the boom of his fall had finished echoing off the dome, it was over. Corvith Draal, the shadow of the training hall, the unofficial law of 41 worlds, the creature who had never made a mistake that cost him anything, lay face down on the resin floor with a 17-year-old human girl arranged along his spine, her forearm across his throat, her body a single locked line of leverage that his strength could not break because his strength was the thing holding it closed. He heaved. Of course he heaved. He was 700 pounds of war-caste muscle, and he threw everything he had into throwing her off, and every gram of it fed the lock, tightened the geometry, pressed his own tusks harder into the floor. He could not breathe well. He could not move his arms. He could not reach behind himself, because his arms were pinned wide and his neck was held, and every direction he pushed was a direction she had already accounted for. He made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a very large creature makes when, for the first time in its life, it discovers that being very large is not enough, and the sound carried through the dome and up into the gallery where 41 worlds sat in a silence so total it had weight. Mira's voice, when it came, was quiet and perfectly level and entirely without triumph. "Tap the floor," she said, close to the side of his head, "or I hold this until you sleep. Those are the options, there aren't others." He heaved again, She rode it unmoved, a small stone in a river. "You're spending strength you can't get back," she said, still level, almost gentle, and it was the exact rhythm and cadence of a thing Cyril had once said to her, passed now across 100 light years into the ear of a Threshan war-caste. "Every second it costs you. I'm not spending anything. Do the math." For one more moment, the last moment of the old order, the last moment of the world in which Corvith Drawl was the biggest and therefore the winner, he refused to do the math. He surged one final time, the greatest effort of the whole exchange, every band of muscle in his enormous frame screaming forward, and it moved her not at all, and at the end of it he had less air and less strength and the same impossible small weight locked along his spine, and something in him, some deep war-caste instinct older than his pride, finally did the arithmetic. He tapped the floor, twice, then a third time, harder, unmistakable. Instructor Vess Alun had not moved. This was the detail that would haunt her, in the good way, for the rest of her career. She had poised herself at the edge of the circle with 1 foot forward and 40 years of readiness in her limbs, prepared to throw herself between the girl and the killing that everyone knew was coming. She had told the human, plainly, that her hands would be too slow. She had believed it as a warning. She had not understood, until this morning, that it would be true in a way she had never once anticipated in 4 decades of standing at the edges of circles. She had been too slow to stop the fight, not because it was too fast for her to reach the girl, but because it had ended before there was anything to stop. She had seen it, almost. Alone among every witness in the dome, she had been poised and angled and moving toward the center, her wind-fast Solon reflexes already firing, and even so, even with all of that, she had caught only fragments. The human walking forward when she should have retreated, the Threshan's weight dropping, and then a blur, a boom, and Corvith Drawl face down with a child on his back. The middle, the actual thing, the door opening and the girl passing through it, had happened in the gap that even Alun's reflexes could not cross. She had been the fastest witness in the room and she had still missed it, and the fact that she had missed it, that even she had missed it, told her more than any slow-motion replay could have. She had, in her long life, seen exactly one thing move like that. Herself once, when she was young. Alun released the breath she had been holding, and she lowered the hand she had raised without realizing she had raised it, and she walked into the circle. "Submission," she said. Her voice did not shake because she had 4 decades of not letting her voice shake, but the cadets nearest the front would swear afterward that they heard something in it they had never heard from Instructor Alun before. First submission. "The bout is concluded. Cadet Voss, release him." Mira released him. She did it the way she had done everything, without drama, unlocking the geometry in a single clean motion, and rolling clear before the great slab of his body could react, coming up onto her feet at a safe distance in the same movement, hands loose at her sides. Breathing, the cadets noticed this, the ones close enough to see breathing almost normally. She had not spent herself. That was the thing that would spread through the dome and the corridors and the whole station by nightfall, faster than the fall of Corvith Drawl, faster even than the impossible speed of it. She had beaten the shadow of the training hall and she was not even out of breath, because she had not fought him. She had ended him, and ending, as an old woman in a cold room above a market had taught her, costs almost nothing when it is done correctly. Corvith Drawl pushed himself up off the floor. It took him longer than it should have. Not because he was hurt, the lock had not injured him. That was not its purpose. Its purpose was leverage and not damage. But because a thing had broken in him that was not in his body, and the body, sensing it, moved slowly, the way a creature moves when the ground it has stood on all its life has become uncertain. He rose to his full towering height, and the gallery flinched, because the gallery expected what the gallery had always seen. The shadow rising in fury, the small thing about to be destroyed for its insolence, the natural order violently restored. He turned to face her. 700 pounds of war-caste Threshan, tusks scored with resin, small black eyes fixed on the 17-year-old human who had just laid him out in front of 41 worlds. And the dome held its breath because this was the moment. Sanctioned or not, concluded or not, everyone in that hall understood that the true test was not the fight. The true test was now. A creature like Corvith Draal did not lose, could not lose in the architecture of his own pride. And a Threshan war-caste who could not accept a loss had exactly one way to resolve the impossibility, and it was not with words. And Instructor Alun shifted her weight again, because she knew it too, and this time she might actually be too slow. Corvith looked at Mira for a long moment. Then he did the thing that no one in the dome had prepared for, the thing that would be argued about longer than the fight itself, the thing that would, in the end, matter more than the takedown or the lock or the speed. He lowered his head. Not in aggression. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his great tusked head until his chin nearly touched the broad slab of his chest, and he held it there, and the gesture rippled through the gallery like a shockwave, because every Threshan in the dome, and there were several, went utterly rigid at the sight of it. It was a Threshan gesture. It did not translate cleanly. The Concord software behind Mira's ear offered her a hesitant approximation a half-second late, a small text bloom at the edge of her vision. Gesture, acknowledgement of a superior, concession of standing, formal, rare, profound. Corvith Draal, war-caste, had just conceded standing to a human. "You saw it," he said. His rumbling voice had changed. The grinding contempt was gone from it, and what remained was something rower, something that in a Threshan was very close to wonder. "The moment. You saw the moment I gave you. I did not know I gave it. 3 cycles in this hall, and no one has ever seen the moment I give. I did not know I had one to give." He raised his head again, and his small black eyes searched her face as though he might find the answer written on it. "What are you? What is your kind that makes such a thing?" And Mira Voss, 17 years old, smallest sentient in a dome full of predators, looked up at the creature who had promised to take her tongue, and gave him the truth. "We're new," she said. "You said it yourself. You're new to us and we're new to you." She paused, and something almost like kindness moved across her flat, dark eyes. "You've been the biggest thing in every room your whole life. You never had to learn what happens after a mistake because you never made one that cost you. That's not strength, that's just never having lost. Where I'm from, we lose a lot. Then we get up. That's the part you've never done." She let it sit for a moment. "You'll be better now. You just learned the only lesson that matters. It cost you a fall in front of everyone. That's cheap. I've paid more for less." The dome was silent. Corvith Draal absorbed it. A creature of pure pride, publicly unmade, being told by the small thing that had unmade him that the unmaking was a gift. And the gallery waited for the fury, the eruption, the war-caste's final answer to an insult layered atop a defeat. It did not come. Instead, slowly, the enormous Threshan straightened to his full height, and he looked around the dome at the 41 worlds who had watched him fall, and he did not flinch from them. And then he looked back at Mira, and he said, in a voice pitched to carry, in a voice meant to be heard and logged and remembered, "The human cadet Voss defeated me fairly, by skill I did not possess and could not see. I concede standing. Any who question her right to stand in this hall may question me first." His tusks caught the amber light. "I will be at the front of the line to defend her. That is the war-caste's answer to a debt of honor. And that, not the takedown, not the lock, not the impossible 2 seconds. That was the moment the training hall on Threshan Station changed forever." For a long moment after Corvith Draal spoke his oath, no one in the training dome moved. It was not that they did not understand him. They understood him perfectly. The words had been chosen to be understood, pitched to carry, meant for the record of memory. It was that understanding him required each of them to set down a thing they had been carrying so long they had forgotten its weight. The certainty that the order of the dome was fixed, that mass ruled, that the human was the mistake at the bottom of it all. Corvith had just set that certainty down in front of everyone, publicly, deliberately, and the whole gallery had to decide, in real time, whether to pick it back up or leave it on the floor beside him. They left it on the floor. It began with the quills. A single cadet in the high gallery raised herself on her perch and rasped her spines together, not the small gesture of surprise she had made when Mira first spoke, but the long, deliberate, ringing rasp that the quills used for one thing only, the acknowledgement of a thing that had never happened before and would be told of afterward. It was their highest mark. It was not given lightly, and it was almost never given to an outsider. And when the first quills gave it, the others followed, a dozen of them, 2 dozen, until the high gallery rang with a sound like wind through metal reeds, and the sound rolled down over the dome and broke over the small human standing at the center of the circle. The Vandre folded their 4 arms, all of them, the deepest posture. The Solon, who did not gesture, who calculated, did the thing the Solon did instead. They were still. Perfectly, attentively still, every luminous eye fixed on Mira, and among the Solon that stillness was not indifference but its opposite, the whole of their attention, given without reservation, the highest thing a Solon could offer a being it had decided was worth watching. And the Threshan, the several of them scattered through the gallery, lowered their heads. Not because Corvith had shown them it was possible, that a war-caste could concede standing to something small and not be diminished by it, could in fact be enlarged. For 3 cycles they had watched Corvith teach them that standing was taken by force and defended by fear. And in one morning the human had taught them, and Corvith with them, that there was a kind of standing that could not be taken by force at all, that had to be earned by seeing what force could not see, and that this kind was higher and older, and did not diminish when it was shared. Instructor alone stood at the edge of the circle and watched 41 worlds bow, in their 41 different ways, to a 17-year-old human who had been on her station for 11 days. And she thought, though she would never say it aloud, not for years, that she had just watched the Academy do, in 90 seconds, the thing it had been built 400 years ago to do and had never quite managed: make one species truly learn from another. Mira stood in the center of it and did not know what to do with any of it. That was the truth, underneath the composure. She had come to the dome that morning prepared to end a fight, and she had ended it, and she had been prepared for what came after a fight, the medical bay, or the medical bay for someone else, or the long grind of proving herself over and over against every large thing that wanted to test the result. She had not been prepared for this. She had not been prepared for the ringing of the quills and the folding of the Vandre and the stillness of the Solon and the lowered heads of the Threshan, for the sudden vertiginous experience of being, after 11 days at the bottom of the table, lifted without warning to a place she had never asked to stand. She did the only thing she knew how to do with it. She stayed small. She did not raise her arms in triumph. She did not address the gallery. She looked at Corvith Drawl, who had unmade himself in front of everyone to give her his oath, and she understood that the largest and most fragile thing in the dome right now was not her standing but his pride, freshly broken and freshly rebuilt into something better, and that if she took the moment for herself, she would waste the gift he had just paid for so dearly. So she gave it back to him. "I accept your oath," she said, in the quiet voice that carried anyway, "and I'll tell you what it's worth, so you know I mean it. Any human who ever wears this gray after me is going to hear about Corvith Drawl. Not that you lost. That you got up better than you fell, that's the part that's worth telling. That's the part I'll tell," she let it land. "You didn't lose standing this morning. You traded up. Most people never figure out how to do that. You did it in the first 90 seconds after your first real defeat. Where I'm from, that's the rarest thing there is." The great war-caste Threshan absorbed it, and something in the set of his enormous shoulders eased, and the gallery, which had bowed to the human, now watched the human bow, in her own human way, to the creature she had beaten, and understood that they were watching 2 beings do a thing that neither of their species had names for, and that both of their species were about to need to learn. Instructor Alun lifted her hand a final time. "The bout is concluded," she said, and this time there was no grief in her voice at all, only something that in a warmer species might have been pride. "The dome is dismissed. Cadet Voss report to the medical bay for the mandatory post-bout examination, though I suspect they will find nothing to treat." A pause, dry as the vacuum outside the hull. "See that you are not late for conditioning tomorrow. You are still last in the rankings, cadet. A morning's miracle does not excuse you from the run." And that, the return to the ordinary, the reminder that she was still small and still slow and still at the bottom of every metric the Academy measured, was, in its own way, the greatest gift the old Salon could have given her. Because it told the whole dome that the miracle changed nothing about the work, and that Mira Voss would keep doing the work, last in the rankings and first in the only thing that mattered, and that the getting up was not a single morning's event, but a way of living that would go on long after the story of the fight had worn smooth in the telling. Mira almost smiled. "Yes, Instructor," she said, "I'll be there for the run." She was, of course, last again the next morning, and the morning after that. And she got up every time and kept perfect books on the cost of everything, and the whole Academy watched a small human finish last in every race and lead in the only thing that could not be raced. And slowly, over the days that followed, the watching turned into something none of them had a word for yet. The thing that would, 6 days later, send 6 strangers into a disaster behind her without a second thought, because they had learned, watching her lose the run and get up and lose it again, exactly what kind of creature they were dealing with. Not the strongest, not the fastest, the one who got up always, every time, forever. The one who kept the books. Word does not travel through an academy, it floods it. By the time the morning conditioning rotation ended, there was not a cadet on Threshan station who had not heard some version of what happened in the training dome, and because it had happened faster than perception, because even the eyewitnesses could not agree, the versions multiplied and mutated and grew. In one, the human had thrown Corvith Drawl over her shoulder like a sack of grain. In another, she had struck him a single blow to a nerve cluster that no Threshan was known to possess. In a third, and this one persisted longest, because it was closest to the unsettling truth, she had simply walked toward him, and he had fallen, as though the space around the human obeyed different rules than the space around anyone else. The truth, as it spread, did something stranger than any of the exaggerations. It frightened people. Not because Mira Voss was frightening in herself. She was small, quiet, unassuming. She went to the mess hall that midday and ate her ration in a corner with the same unremarkable stillness she'd had on her first day, and cadets who passed her table did double takes not because she was intimidating, but because they could not reconcile the size of her with the size of what she had done. What frightened them was the implication. For 11 days the Academy had known exactly what a human was. The soft new species, the fragile ones, the 3 washouts, the mistake near the bottom of the table. That knowledge had been comfortable. It had a place for everyone, and the human's place was beneath. And then, in under 2 seconds, a 17-year-old girl had taken the single most feared cadet in the dome and folded him onto the floor without breaking a sweat, and the comfortable knowledge shattered, and into the space where it had been rushed a new and far less comfortable question, and the question spread from world to world along the corridors of Threshan station like a change in air pressure. If that is what the smallest human can do, what is a human? The Threshan cadets took it hardest, and in a way that surprised everyone best. Their entire culture was built on the recognition of standing earned through combat, and by the oldest and most binding of their customs, Mira had earned standing that could not be argued with. The younger Threshan, who had spent 3 cycles cowering beneath Corvith's shadow, watched their tormentor concede to the human and felt something they had never been permitted to feel, the possibility that mass was not destiny. Within days, 2 of them had quietly asked Mira, awkwardly, formally, in the stiff way of a people not built for asking, whether she would show them what she had done. She said yes. She did not ask for anything in return. That too spread. The Salin watched and calculated, as the Salin did. The Vandre folded their forearms in the witnessing posture whenever she passed and did not unfold them, which was, in their culture, a mark of ongoing respect that most cadets never earned in 4 years. The Quills, who prized surprise above nearly all things, had adopted her as a kind of living proverb. A Quills cadet who did something unexpectedly effective was now said, across the whole gallery, to have walked toward the Threshan. But respect is not the same as acceptance, and awe is not the same as trust, and there were those on Kesrin Station for whom the fall of Corvith Draw was not a wonder but a threat. His name was Instructor Perrin Salomane, and he was not a fighter. He was Concord administrative, one of the gray career officers who ran the machinery of the academy from the offices along its spine, scheduling, discipline, the endless flow of assessments and reports that flowed up from Kesrin to the Concord's distant central worlds. He had been on the station 11 years. He had watched the first 3 human cadets wash out, and each time he had filed the paperwork with a small private satisfaction, because Perrin Salomane had opposed humanity's admission to the Concord from the beginning, had written memoranda about it, had built a modest career-long reputation as one of the sober voices counseling caution about the loud new species from the rimward frontier. The washouts had proven him right. 3 times he had a folder. And now a human girl had walked into the training dome and inverted the natural order in under 2 seconds, and Perrin Salomane understood, faster than the cadets did, faster than the instructors, exactly what it meant not for the dome, but for the argument. His argument. The careful, decade-long argument that humans were a liability, a risk, a species best kept at the bottom of the table where they could do the least harm. That argument had just taken a blow it might not survive, and Perrin Salomane had built too much of himself on it to let it fall without a fight. He could not challenge Mira Voss in the dome. He was no fighter, and even if he had been, the sanction system had already ruled. She had won cleanly by the Academy's own laws, honored by the very species she had defeated. He could not touch that. But there were other kinds of contest, and Perrin Salomane had spent 11 years mastering all of them. He began, as administrators begin, with paper. A quiet review, filed the same afternoon, questioning whether the bout had been properly sanctioned, whether Instructor Alun had erred in permitting a challenge between combatants of such disparate experience, whether the human's acceptance had been fully informed, whether there were grounds to void the result, and ideally, to enter a formal note of concern about the human cadet's conduct and judgment that would follow her file all the way up the ladder. It was thin. He knew it was thin. But thin was enough in the machinery of the Concord to slow a thing down, to attach a shadow to a name, to plant the seed of doubt in the minds of the distant officials who would one day decide whether a 5th human should ever be sent at all. Instructor Alun found the review waiting in her queue that evening, and she read it twice, and then she went to find Perrin Salomane. Their conversation was not recorded, but the effects of it were, because the next morning Alun did something she had not done in her 40 years on Kesrin Station. She called for an open assessment. An open assessment was an old provision in the Academy's charter, rarely invoked, half forgotten. It allowed any instructor to place a cadet before a panel of the full instructional staff and the assembled cadet body, to be tested not in a single bout, but across the whole breadth of what the Academy taught: combat, command, judgment under pressure, the capacity to lead beings not one's own kind. It existed to settle exactly the sort of question Perrin Salomane had tried to bury in paperwork, not whether a cadet could win a fight, but whether a cadet belonged. "You have doubts about the human's judgment," Alun said to Salomane in the one part of their exchange that was witnessed, in the corridor outside the assessment hall, in front of a dozen cadets who happened, not entirely by chance, to be present. "You have committed them to the record. Good. The record deserves an answer, We will hold an open assessment. Cadet Voss will stand before all of us, and we will test not her fists but her fitness, and whatever the panel finds will go into your file and hers and mine, and the Concord may judge us all by it. Her luminous eyes were very steady. You wish to slow this down and make it a matter of record. I am happy to oblige. Let us make it a very large matter of record indeed. Perrin Salomane had wanted a quiet shadow on a file. He had gotten an open assessment before the entire academy, and he understood too late that he had been outmaneuvered by a fighter after all, just not in the dome. But he was Concord administrative, and administrators do not fold merely because a gambit has gone wrong. They adapt. And Perrin Salomane, walking away from that corridor with a dozen cadets watching him go, began already to think about how an open assessment, properly shaped, might be made to break a small human girl in ways a Threshan's tusks never could. Because a fight, he understood, could be won in 2 seconds by someone fast enough to see a door. But an assessment was not a door. An assessment was a corridor with no end, a test that could be extended and complicated and stacked until even the fastest, cleverest cadet in the dome simply ran out of the one resource Mira Voss had built her whole discipline around conserving. He would make her spend, and spend, and spend, until the small human had nothing left and the whole academy watched her empty out, and the comfortable old knowledge humans are fragile, humans are less, humans belong at the bottom was restored in front of everyone, permanently on the record forever. He smiled, alone in the corridor, and went to work. Mira learned about the open assessment the way she learned about most things on Threshan Station, quietly, from the edge, by watching. A Vandre cadet named Thessaly, one of the four-armed, and the closest thing Mira had to a friend in the 11 days plus the several that had passed since the fight, folded down beside her in the mess hall that evening and told her, in the low, flat register the Vandre used for confidences, what was happening. "Salomane wants you gone," Thessaly said. "He wanted the 3 before you gone too, and he got his wish, and he keeps a record of it. Now he wants to add you to the record. The open assessment is a loon's answer. It sounds like a defense of you, and in one way it is. But understand what it costs." 2 of her 4 arms made the folding gesture of concern. An open assessment is not one bout. It is everything, all of it, across a full day, and Salomane will help design the tests. He will make them long. He will make them relentless. He will build them to exhaust you, because he saw what everyone saw, that you did not spend yourself against the Threshan, that your whole method is to spend nothing. So he will make a test where spending is the only way through, and he will make it longer than you can last, and when you empty out in front of everyone, that is what goes into the record. Not the Threshan. That. Mira listened, and turned her ration over slowly, and said nothing for a while. "He's smart," she said finally. "He is. Smarter than Corvith." "Far smarter. Corvith challenged you with his body. Salomane will never come within reach of you. That is what makes him dangerous. You cannot walk toward him. There is no door." Thessaly's dark eyes were troubled. "I am sorry, Mira. You won the fight and it made you an enemy who does not fight." Mira was quiet again, and in the quiet she was doing the thing she always did, the thing Cyril had built into her below thought. She was studying the cost. Because Salomane was right about her method, and he was right that a test built to exhaust her was the one shape of contest her whole discipline could not simply solve with a door. But every advantage was a cost. That was the first law of the low, cold room, the only law that never bent. Salomane's advantage was that he stood outside her reach and made her spend. What did it cost him? What did he have to leave open in order to be as dangerous as he was? She thought about it that night, lying in the too large bunk in the human-sized berth that the quartermaster had grudgingly reconfigured. And somewhere in the small hours she found it, the way she always found it eventually, and when she found it she almost smiled. Salomane's advantage was that the assessment tested endurance she did not have, But an assessment did not only test the cadet. An assessment, by the Academy's own ancient charter, tested the cadet's fitness to lead beings not her own kind, and that was not a thing you did alone. That was not a thing that could be measured by making one small human run until she dropped. Salome, in building a test to exhaust the individual, would have to leave open the one thing the charter required him to include and the one thing he could not control: other people. Cadets. Aliens. Beings who had, in the days since the fight, begun for the first time in the Academy's history to look at a human and think not there is the fragile one but there is the one who walked toward the Threshan. He was going to make her spend alone. She was going to make sure she never stood alone. That was the door. It was not in his body because he had no body in this fight. It was in his plan. And Mira Voss had spent 11 years learning that the bigger and more committed the thing coming at you, the wider the door it had to leave open. And Perrin Salome had just committed the entire weight of his career and his decade-long argument to a single enormous plan. The door, she thought, closing her eyes, is very wide. The open assessment was held 6 days later in the great assessment hall along the spine of Threshan Station, and it was, as Alun had promised, a very large matter of record indeed. The whole Academy came. It had to. That was the point of an open assessment, that nothing about it be hidden, that the judgment be rendered in front of everyone so that no shadow could later be attached to it in a file. The instructional staff sat along a raised dais in their gray formal robes. Perrin Salome sat among them, having secured, as Thessaly predicted, a hand in the design of the tests, his gray face composed and patient and certain. And in the great tiered gallery sat every cadet on the station, 41 worlds, and among them the Threshan, and near the front, unmissable Corvith Drawl, his tusks freshly polished, his small black eyes fixed on the floor of the hall where the human would stand. Mira walked in alone, in the plain gray undersuit, and stood in the center, and looked up at the dais without expression. The assessment began the way Salome had built it, with exhaustion. They ran her through the conditioning circuits first, the full brutal Concord standard, calibrated to a middle no species found kind. She finished last. Of course she finished last. She was the smallest, the physical metrics had never been in doubt, and Salome had made sure the assessment opened here, on the ground where she was weakest, so that the record would show from its first line that the human could not keep up. She came off the last circuit with her small chest heaving, her legs unsteady, sweat running into her eyes, and the gallery watched her spend, exactly as Salome had designed, and a low murmur went through the tiers that was not cruel but was worse than cruel. It was the sound of people beginning to doubt. Then the combat trials, one after another, no rest between them. Salome had arranged the order with care. Not one great opponent she could end with a door, but a long sequence of lesser ones, each fresh, each rested, each sent against a human who grew more tired with every exchange. She won them. She won every one of them, because the door was always there for those who could see it. But Salome had understood something true, that even a perfect method costs a little each time, that even ending things cheaply is not ending them for free, and across a long enough sequence the little costs accumulate, and by the 8th opponent Mira Voss was moving slower, and by the 11th her doors were opening a fraction late, and the gallery's murmur had grown into something with an edge of pity in it. And up on the dais Perrin Salome allowed himself, for the first time, a small satisfied stillness. He had found the shape of contest that a human could not win. He had only forgotten, in his 11 years of paper and patience, that the assessment was not only about the fists. Because the final phase of any open assessment by the Academy's own charter, older than Salome, older than Alun, older than the human washouts and the comfortable knowledge, was the command trial. And the command trial did not test whether a cadet could fight. It tested whether a cadet could lead, whether beings not her own kind would follow her freely into difficulty, when there was nothing forcing them to. Salome had let it stand in the design, because he had assumed it was moot. He had assumed the human would arrive at the command trial already broken by the exhaustion phase, a spent and stumbling thing, and that no cadet in the hall would follow a spent and stumbling thing, and that this final failure, the failure to lead, witnessed by all, entered into the record, would be the true and lasting proof of everything he had argued for 11 years. He had built a test to empty her out, and left open the one door that could not be closed by emptying her out, because it was never about what she had left in herself. It was about what she had built in everyone else. The 6 days between the fall of Corvith Drawl and the open assessment were, for Mira Voss, the strangest of her life, and not because of the fight. She had expected the fight to change things. It had. What she had not expected was the shape of the change. Not the fear, though there was fear, and not the awe, though there was awe, but the small, constant, human-scaled way that individual cadets, one at a time, began to find reasons to be near her. It started with the 2 young Threshan. They came to her the morning after the fight in the training dome, and they stood in front of her the way large shy creatures stand, hunched and formal and unable to meet her eyes. They were named Vergeth and Sesh, and they had spent 3 cycles beneath Corvith's shadow, flinching in the corridors, giving up the best equipment without a word, learning the lesson their culture taught about standing and about what happened to those who had none. And they had watched Mira take the shadow apart, and something had cracked open in them, and now they did not quite know what to do with the light coming through the crack. "You showed us a thing," Vergeth said at last, staring at the floor. "That mass is not destiny. We are Threshan. We are taught mass is everything, but you are not mass, and you unmade the largest of us, and now we do not know what we are taught anymore." He forced his small black eyes up to hers. "Will you show us the thing you did? We will not ask again if you refuse. We know we have no claim on you." Mira looked at the 2 of them, young and enormous and frightened of a small human's answer, and she thought about the low, cold room above the market, and about how Cyril had never once turned away a child who genuinely wanted to learn, no matter how unpromising, because wanting to learn was the whole of it and the rest was only time. "I'll show you," she said, "but not the fall. Everybody wants the fall. The fall is nothing, it's the last 2 inches of a thing that starts a long way back." She gestured them toward an empty circle. "I'll show you the part before, the seeing. That's the only part worth having. Come on. First thing you're going to learn is how much your own strength costs you, and you're not going to like it." They did not like it. Nobody ever liked it. But they came back the next day, and the day after, and by the 4th day there were 5 of them, and by the 6th there were 9. Cadets from 6 worlds crowding a corner of the training dome in the early hours before the sanctioned rotations, learning from the smallest sentient on the station, the one thing none of their own instructors had ever taught them, that every advantage they possessed was also a debt, and that a fighter who knew her opponent's debts did not need to be strong. Instructor Alun watched this from the gallery, silently, on the 3rd morning, and did not interrupt and did not log it and went away thinking. Thessaly explained the deeper thing to her, the 4th evening in the mess hall. "You do not understand what you have done," the Vandre said, folding 2 arms in the posture of careful explanation. "Not fully. You think you won a fight and made an enemy of Salomane and gained a few students. That is the surface. Underneath it is something the Concord has not seen in a long time." Her dark eyes were serious. "Every species here comes from a world that survived. That is what it means to be in the Concord. Your people crossed the great filter, learned to leave your world, did not destroy yourselves along the way. And every one of us learned a different lesson from surviving. The Threshan learned mass. The Salan learned speed. The Umbra learned endurance. Each of us thinks our lesson is the lesson, the true one, and the Academy exists to make us doubt that, to make us learn from one another." She paused. "But it does not work well. It has never worked well. We respect one another's lessons in theory and cling to our own in practice, because a lesson that let your whole species survive is very hard to let go of. Do you see?" "I think so," Mira said. Your lesson is different from all of ours, Thessaly said. Your people did not survive by being the strongest or the fastest or the most enduring. You are none of those things. You are, forgive me, rather poor at all of them. Your people survived by being the ones who lost, and got up and lost again and got up again, and in the getting up learned to see exactly what each defeat cost and exactly how to make the next enemy pay more. You did not survive by winning. You survived by refusing to stay down and by keeping perfect books on the price of everything. She folded a third arm. That is a lesson none of us have. And when the cadets watch you, they do not only see a small creature who beat a large one. They see, for the first time, a lesson that is not about being more. It is about seeing more. And that is a thing every species here can learn, no matter how large or small, because it does not require you to be strong. It only requires you to pay attention to costs. That is why they come to your circle in the mornings, not to learn to fight, to learn to see. Mira was quiet for a long moment, turning her ration over. Cyril used to say something like that, she said finally. My teacher. She said the strong never learn to see because they never have to. She said that was their weakness and it never went away, no matter how strong they got, that they'd spend their whole lives never learning the one thing that mattered because they'd never once been forced to. She looked up. She said that's why she liked teaching the small ones. We come pre-broken. We already know the world can put us down. So we're ready to learn the only lesson worth learning, which is what to do after. Thessaly folded all four arms, the full posture, the deepest one, the one Vandre reserved for the acknowledgement of something true and rare. Your teacher, she said, would have done well in the Concord. A loon sent for Mira on the 5th evening, the night before the open assessment. The senior combat instructor's quarters were austere, nearly bare. Asalan's spaces always were, wind-swept and spare. And she received the small human standing by a wide port that looked out on the slow-turning stars and the curve of the world below Threshan station. You know what tomorrow is, a loon said. It was not a question. You know what Salomane built it to be. I saw the design before I approved it. I could have refused parts of it. I did not. Her luminous eyes stayed on the stars. I want you to understand why. I did not leave the exhaustion phase in the design because I doubted you. I left it in because I did not doubt you, and because a vindication is only worth what it costs to earn. If I had made your assessment easy, the record would show an easy assessment, and Salomane would spend the next 10 years whispering that the human was protected, that the panel went soft, that the result cannot be trusted. I will not give him that whisper. She turned from the port at last. I made your assessment the hardest I could make it within the charter because I want the record to be unwhisperable. I want it to be so hard that no one ever can say you were carried. Do you understand what I am asking of you? You're asking me to almost break, Mira said, so that when I don't, there's nothing left to argue about. Yes, Alun said. I am asking you to spend more tomorrow than you have ever spent and to still be standing at the end of it because the standing is the whole of it. I cannot make it easier. Making it easier would betray you more deeply than making it hard. Something moved behind her wide eyes. I did this once, you understand, long ago, when I was young and my own kind doubted whether Asalan could be more than fast, whether we had the weight to lead. I stood an assessment built to break me, and I did not break, and it is the reason I hold this post today. I know exactly what I am asking. I am asking because I believe you can pay it. If I did not believe it, I would have found a way to spare you, and spared you nothing that mattered. Mira looked at the old Salan for a long moment, and understood at last the thing that had been in Alun's voice on the floor of the training dome, the grief that was not grief, the readiness that could not save her, the half-second of poised uselessness at the edge of the circle. You saw it, Mira said slowly. In the dome, the moment, you almost saw the door open. I saw fragments, Alun said. The middle escaped even me. But I have moved like that once when I was young, and so I knew what I was not quite seeing, and I knew that whatever you are the thing I was and rarer. She inclined her long gray-gold head, not the Threshan gesture, a solemn one, but its cousin, its meaning close. That is why I will make tomorrow the hardest day of your life, because you are rare, and rare things must be proven past all doubt, or the doubt outlives the thing. Rest now, Cadet Voss. Tomorrow you will spend everything. See that you keep back only the one thing you must, the seeing. Spend the body, never spend the seeing. Do you understand? Yes, Instructor, Mira said. Spend the body, keep the seeing. Then you already know how to survive tomorrow, Alun said, and turned back to the stars. Go. And Mira went, out into the amber corridors of Threshan Station, and lay in the too large bunk, and did not sleep much, and in the small hours found the door in Salome's plan the way she always found it, and understood that Alun had, in her austere, solemn way, been telling her the same thing all along. That the body would fail tomorrow, that it was meant to, that the failing was the point, and that the only thing she had to protect through all of it was the one thing no exhaustion could touch, the seeing, the arithmetic, the ruthless accounting of costs that a broken old woman in a broken low room had built into her below the reach of thought or tiredness or fear. Spend the body, keep the seeing, never stand alone. She had everything she needed. She had, she realized, had it all along, carried it across 100 light-years of cold, empty space from a cold, low room she would never see again. And it had turned out to be enough. Out here, among the predators, at the bottom of the very old and very tired table, where the smallest of them all was about to prove, one final time and forever, that being put down was not the same as staying down, and that a species that had learned nothing else had at least learned that. The command trial on Threshan Station was run in the simulation cavern, a great hollow chamber below the assessment hall where the Academy could shape any environment it wished out of light and hardened force fields, and the low hum of machines older than any cadet present. For Mira's trial they built a disaster. This was traditional. The command trial always placed the cadet inside a crisis and gave them a team drawn from the assembled cadet body, and it measured, with a precision the Concord had refined over centuries, whether the cadet could hold the team together, make the right calls under pressure, and lead beings not their own kind through something that could not be survived alone. Salome had shaped this particular disaster with care, and its cruelty was in its honesty. It was not rigged, not impossible, not stacked with hidden traps. It was simply hard. Brutally, relentlessly hard, a cascading failure aboard a simulated frontier station, hull breaches, failing life support, trapped personnel, a reactor sliding toward a cascade, the kind of scenario that demanded stamina and swift movement and the physical capacity to be everywhere at once. All the things a small human exhausted by 12 prior combat trials would not have. He gave her a team of 6. He had chosen them, too, within the loose bounds the charter allowed. Not enemies the charter forbade that, but strangers. Cadets from 6 worlds who did not know her, had not trained with her, owed her nothing, and had every physical reason to doubt that the small, stumbling human at the center of the cavern could lead them through anything at all. A Solon, a Quills, 2 Vandre. A Threshan, not Corvith. Salome was not a fool, but a younger one, large and doubtful. And a cadet of a species called the Umbra, dense and slow and enormously strong, who had never in his life taken an order from anything smaller than himself. The simulation began, and the cavern filled with the shriek of alarms and the strobe of failure lights and the crushing sensory chaos that the command trial was built to impose. And Parent Salome, watching from the observation gallery above, settled back to witness the human empty out the last of herself in front of the whole Academy. For the first 90 seconds, it went exactly as he had designed. Mira moved into the chaos and her exhausted body betrayed her. She was slow. She stumbled on the shifting simulated deck. When a section of hull gave way and a torrent of force field pressure roared through the corridor, she could not brace against it the way a larger cadet could, and she was thrown, hard, and the gallery above saw the human girl flung across the deck like a discarded thing, and the murmur that had followed her all day swelled toward a verdict. The 6 cadets of her team looked at her, sprawled and gasping on the deck, and Salome watched them decide. This was the hinge. This was the whole of it, the moment 11 years of argument came down to. Would 6 strangers from 6 worlds follow a small, spent, stumbling human into a disaster, when nothing forced them to, when every physical signal their bodies could read said this creature cannot even stand? Mira got up. She got up slowly, and she was not fast and she was not strong, and she did not pretend to be either. That was the thing Salome had not accounted for, because it was not in his experience that a leader might lead not by being the strongest in the room but by being, plainly and without shame, exactly as weak as she was and leading anyway. She got up, and she did not run to do everything herself because she could not, and she knew she could not, and her whole discipline was built on the ruthless accounting of what a thing costs and who should pay it. Ver, she said, and the Umbra, the dense, slow, enormously strong one who took orders from nothing smaller than himself, turned his heavy head toward her, startled to be named. The breach in Section 3. You're the only one here strong enough to hold the bulkhead against that pressure while the others get the trapped personnel out. I can't do it. None of them can. Only you. Go. She did not ask. She did not plead. She stated the arithmetic plainly, the cost and who alone could pay it, and there was something in the sheer accuracy of it, the way she had, in 90 seconds of chaos, correctly measured exactly what he was for, that moved the Umbra before his pride could object. He went. He set his enormous back against the failing bulkhead and held it, and it was the right call, the only call, and the trapped personnel came out. Thessaly's cohort, she said, naming the Vandre by the folding gesture rather than the name she wasn't supposed to know, 4 arms, 4 tasks, the coolant valves, all of them at once. You're the only ones built to. I'd need 4 passes. You need 1. Go. They went. Quills, you see reactions before they finish. Watch the reactor board and shout the second anything shifts. You're my eyes, nothing else, just that. The Quill's cadet, given the one task her whole biology was built for, went to the board and became, for the length of the crisis, the most alert being in the cavern. And so it went. Mira Voss, spent, slow, physically the weakest being in the disaster, did the one thing that no amount of exhaustion could take from her, because it lived below thought, because an old woman in a cold room had built it into her over 11 years. She measured the cost of everything, and she assigned every cost to the one who could pay it cheapest, and she paid herself only the costs that no one else could carry, the judgment, the sequencing, the terrible fast decisions about what to save first and what to let burn. She led not from the front, where her small body would have failed, but from the still center, where her mind never did. And the 6 strangers followed her, not because she commanded them to, because within 2 minutes each of them had felt the specific, uncanny experience of being seen, of having a leader who knew precisely what they were for, better than they knew themselves, and who spent them wisely and never wastefully, and never asked of any of them the thing they could not give. That is a rare experience in any disaster on any world. Beings will follow it into fire. Beings have always followed it into fire. Up in the observation gallery, Perrin Salome watched the human he had exhausted lead 6 strangers through his brutal, honest, unriggable disaster, and he watched the disaster resolve. The personnel saved, the reactor stabilized, the cascade halted with 40 seconds to spare, and he understood, with the cold clarity of a man watching his own argument die, exactly what had happened to him. He had built a test to prove that a human could not lead beings not her own kind, and he had, in his thoroughness, made the test perfectly fair, perfectly honest, unriggable. And a perfectly fair, honest, unriggable test of whether beings would follow Mira Voss had returned an answer he could not appeal, could not shadow, could not bury in paper, because it was written now in the assessment record in the Concord's own incorruptible hand, witnessed by the entire Academy, in the great open format he himself had helped design. The answer was yes. The command trial ended, the alarms fell silent. The simulated station, saved, powered down into darkness, and in the sudden quiet the 6 cadets of Mira's team turned as one, toward the small, exhausted human at the still center of the cavern, and the Umbra, the one who took orders from nothing smaller than himself, lowered his heavy head, the way Corvith Draal had lowered his, and one by one the others followed, and in the gallery above 41 worlds watched 6 strangers who owed her nothing bow to a spent human girl who could barely stand. Mira did not straighten in triumph. She was too tired for that, and it was not her way in any case. She simply looked at the 6 of them and nodded, once, the way Cyril nodded, twice a decade, and said quietly, in the voice that did not carry but carried anyway, "Thank you. That was good work, all of you. And then, because it was true and because the record deserved the truth, I couldn't have done any of it alone. That's the whole point. Nobody can, that's why they test it." She had answered Salome's question before he ever asked it, in the small hours of a sleepless night, lying in a too large bunk. He had wanted to make her spend until she was empty, and she had come to the assessment already having decided that she would never stand alone, because standing alone was the one shape of the fight she could not win, and so she had simply refused to fight it that way. The door had been in his plan. It had been very wide. She had walked through it without his ever seeing it open. The panel deliberated for less time than any open assessment in the Academy's recorded history. They did not need long. The record was in front of them, complete and unambiguous, written in the Concord's own hand. A cadet who had finished last in every physical metric and won every combat trial regardless. A cadet who, exhausted past the point where any larger being would have failed, had led 6 strangers from 6 worlds through an unriggable disaster and brought all of them out. A cadet to whom, by the day's end, both the training hall's toughest and a stranger who bowed to nothing smaller than himself had lowered their heads. There was, in the end, nothing to deliberate. There was only the formality of saying aloud what the entire Academy had spent a day watching become undeniable. Instructor Vess Alun rose from the dais to render it, and she looked down at the small human standing spent and steady in the center of the hall, and for the length of a breath, the 40 years of professional discipline slipped, just slightly, and something that was almost warmth showed in her wide, luminous eyes. "Cadet Mira Voss," she said, and her dry voice filled the great hall without effort now because the hall had gone so silent to receive it. "The panel finds you fit, not fit for a human, not fit despite your nature. Fit by the full and equal standard of this Academy, the same standard applied to every cadet of every world who has ever stood where you now stand." She let that land, and then she said the rest, the part that was not required, the part she chose to add for the record and for the argument, and for the 3 who had washed out before this one and the ones who would come after. "In 40 years I have watched thousands of cadets cross this floor. I have seen the strong and the swift and the clever. I tell you now, as the senior combat instructor of this station, that I have seen very few of any species, in any age, who understood as young as this cadet does the single hardest truth of our profession. That strength is only strength when it can be applied, and that a leader's first duty is to know the true cost of everything, and to spend her people wisely, and to spend herself last." Her eyes moved deliberately to the gray figure seated further along the dais. "Let the record show it plainly so that no shadow may ever be attached to it. The human belongs here. The question is answered. It will not be asked again in my hall." Parent Salome said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had wanted a quiet shadow on a file, and he had gotten instead the single largest and most public and most incorruptible vindication of a human cadet in the Concord's short experience of humanity, entered permanently into the record in the open format he had helped build, endorsed in words that would travel up the ladder to the distant central worlds, and undo, in a single afternoon, the patient decade of his careful argument. He had committed everything to one enormous plan, and the plan had left a door open, and the small human had walked through it. And now his career-long thesis lay on the floor of the assessment hall, the way Corvith Draal had lain on the floor of the training dome, face down, all its strength intact, none of it able to reach the thing that had unmade it. He did what administrators do. He adapted, or tried to. He would file no more reviews about Mira Voss. There was no percentage in it now, and Perrin Salomane had always been, above all, a creature of the percentages. In the weeks that followed, he would even, in a small private recalibration of a small careerist soul, begin to speak of the human cadet with a grudging correctness, because a man who has bet everything on the wrong side of a question and lost learns quickly to stop being seen at the table. He was not redeemed. Men like Perrin Salomane are rarely redeemed. They merely adjust. But he was, at least, finished as a threat, and that was enough, and it was more than Mira had needed him to be. She had not, after all, been trying to defeat him. She had only been trying to make sure the question was answered so completely that no one would have to answer it again, not her, and not the fifth human, and not the 50th. She had come across a great deal of cold, empty space specifically to do that, and now, in a single day, it was done in the record forever. Corvith Draal was waiting for her outside the assessment hall. The corridors of Threshan station had emptied as the cadets dispersed toward their berths, buzzing, and the great war-caste Threshan stood alone in the amber half-light, enormous and still. And when the small human came out, he lowered his head, the profound gesture, the rare one, and this time she understood it without the translator's help. "I have thought about what you said," he rumbled. The grinding contempt was still gone, it had not come back, and it never would. In the dome, that I had never learned what happens after a mistake because I had never made one that cost me. I did not believe you at first. I told myself you were small and clever and lucky, and that the moment had been an accident of your smallness. He paused. But I have watched you today. There was no luck today. You were tired past what I could have endured, and you did not spend yourself into ruin the way pride would have made me spend, and you led 6 strangers through a disaster by knowing exactly what each of them was worth. That is not luck. That is a thing I do not have and had never known a person could have. His small black eyes searched her face. Will you teach it to me? Not the fall. The other thing, the seeing of costs. And Mira Voss, 17 years old, looked up at the creature who had promised to take her tongue and had ended by asking her to teach him how to think. And she felt, for the first time since she had walked through the iris door those weeks ago, something loosen in her chest that she had not known was clenched. "Yes," she said, "but you have to understand what it means. If I teach you to see costs, you'll stop being able to unsee them. You'll never again be able to just be the biggest thing in the room and let that be enough. It'll be gone. Some part of you will miss it. Most people who learn this miss it." She held his gaze. "Do the math on that before you say yes. That's the first lesson. Do the math before you commit. Not after." Corvith Draal was quiet for a long moment, and then, slowly, the great tusked face did something no cadet on Threshan station had ever seen it do. It came as close to a smile as a Threshan face could come. "I did the math," he said, "before, when I first watched you rise off the deck today and not spend yourself into ruin. That is why I am here." He lowered his head one final time. "Teach me, small one, and I will do what a war-caste does with a debt of honor. I will stand at the front of the line, not against you, beside you, for as long as we both wear the gray. Word does not travel through an academy, it floods it." And by the following morning, the whole of Threshan station knew that the human girl who had ended the academy's toughest bully before the instructor could stop. It had been found fit by the full and equal standard. Endorsed in words, the senior combat instructor had not offered another cadet in 40 years, and had taken the fallen bully not as an enemy but as her first student. The 3 humans who had washed out before her were not forgotten. Mira would not let them be. She spoke of them when asked, with a plain respect that surprised the aliens, because to her they were not failures but the ones who had walked the road first and worn it smoother for the one who came behind. But their story was no longer humanity's story at the Academy. The comfortable old knowledge, humans are fragile, humans are less, humans belong at the bottom of the very old and very tired club's table was gone, and it did not come back, because it had been unmade not in a single lucky fight but across a full day of open, honest, incorruptible record, in front of 41 worlds, in a way that could never be shadowed or filed away or explained. There is a thing, Cyril used to say, in the cold low room above the market on the last day of every year, to the few children who had stayed. You are not learning to win fights, she would say. Winning fights is nothing. A fight won is a fight forgotten by nightfall. You are learning to end the reason for the fight. That is the only victory that lasts. Anyone can knock a person down. Very few can knock a thing down in such a way that it never needs to be knocked down again. Mira Voss had knocked something down in the training dome on Threshan station in under 2 seconds, faster than the instructor could stop it, faster than perception could follow. But that was not the victory that lasted, and she had known it even as she locked the geometry and told the great war-caste to do the math. The victory that lasted came later. In an unriggable disaster she led 6 strangers through while barely able to stand. In an open record no administrator could shadow. In the lowered head of a creature that bowed to nothing smaller than itself. In a question answered so completely that no human who ever wore the gray of the Academy would have to answer it again. She had come a very long way, across a great deal of cold, empty space, to end the reason for the fight. And standing in the amber half-light of a corridor, 100 light-years from a cold, low room she would never see again, with the Academy's toughest cadet lowering his tusked head beside her and 41 worlds already telling the story wrong in 41 different ways, the smallest sentient on Threshan station, the 4th human, the one they said was a mistake, finished the last of the arithmetic, and found for the first time in her life that the numbers came out to something that felt very much like home.